Sonic, the heart of your system.
What's up guys, welcome back to another GGF mod build video, and today we'll be taking a look at the two recent builds I did in the O11 AIR Mini. So we did the black one and the white one. Now first off, you may have noticed my hand is in a cast. Here's a tip: if you do stub your toe, don't take your anger out on a door frame because you'll probably end up like this, and I have broken a finger, so it is going to be a little bit tricky. I've still got a few builds to come up to finish, and I'm going to try and do some time-lapse builds like this. I didn't really realize that if you do break a finger, it makes your whole hand basically unusable. It's very, very hard to use most of my hand. I'm just getting some feeling back in some of the fingers, so I will see how I go. But anyway, I want to jump in, and some things I want to cover on the Air Mini. You may notice that LIAN LI did do a recall on the mesh panels. I have received the new ones, although I haven't done any testing. I just want to show you the difference in the holes between the old ones and the new ones. Like at first sight, just standing back, you really can't tell. I guess if you're standing back and you can look through them, you can definitely see through more on the new ones, because that was the aim. As the issue with the original ones is there weren't so many more holes. The problem is the holes to material ratio wasn't enough. There weren't enough holes, or they were too small, and it just meant there was a lot of metal material around the holes and between all the holes, and they were just too small. So now the holes are bigger, which means there's less metal material around all the holes, if that makes sense, which makes more airflow. So I'll throw some shots of those. I want to cover these rad covers, rad skirts, side skirts, whichever you want to call them. It's something I've never done before, and I really just did this because of the way this case was designed and how the rads looked. I'll cover that. I want to cover how the bottom radiator is connected in the black build. A lot of people were saying that is the bottom rad just for show? They can't see it connected, but I will tell you, every rad I use in my builds are definitely not just for show. They're always connected in the loop. An active backplate. First time I really used active backplates. Yes, this is a 3080. You don't need an active backplate at all, but I thought with the extra RGB and the looks in this build, I wanted to add it, and the issues I encountered with running an active backplate in the very first PCIe slot. Not so much on a normal ATX board, the first PCIe slot, because that is down one in the case. So you have the PCIe slot on the back of the case will be blank, and then you'll have your first slot. But on an MATX board, or even ITX boards, it starts at the very, very top of the case, and then you'll have issues like it'll hit your IO, cover, shield, and things like your DIMM slots as well, so I'll cover that. So jumping into the new mesh covers, I just want to do a side-by-side comparison. I'll probably do it with them off the case. So on the left, we have the original ones with the holes, and then we have the new mesh covers, and they basically have just doubled the size of the holes. And unfortunately, I haven't really done any testing. I guess being water-cooled build, it's going to be very, very hard to test these. So I'm just going to show you the differences. And then these panels also consisted in the top, the front, and then also the back. So there's 3 new panels. And I think what LIAN LI have done is, I'm not sure if anyone has received any cases originally or if any actually got out, but I think they were all for pre-order. I'm sure if you happen to did grab one of the original ones without them, LIAN LI would happily send you the new panels, just like they sent me, because of course I did get the original ones being sent to them for review and the early samples. But yeah, I think they pretty much halted all orders to get them right, and I do believe they are now starting to sift out to all the retailers with the new upgraded panels. So that's actually really good to see, and I think kudos to LIAN LI for actually doing that and not letting them go out and just say, hey, if you want the extra ones, contact us. If you don't, or even just going to the fact of making all the new panels, because I'm sure a lot of companies out there probably wouldn't do that. That's enough on that. Major thing I want to cover are the rad covers. This kind of blew up, and the main reason why I'm doing this mod video is to cover these the side covers I made for both of these. Now these are just simple strips of aluminum. They come in about 1 to 2 meter length, and then I just cut them down. You can see on one side it's got all these little grooves, and then on the other side it is completely flat. So I actually did on the white build start with the groove side. I did paint the groove side. Now you may notice there's all these random notches. This is because depending on how close you want it to the side panel, if you want it really close to the side panel, you may have to cut out random stuff to avoid things like the top panel, to avoid pop rivets. But if you want to push it all the way back against the radiator, you don't really need to do this. You can just stick it straight onto the radiator. And as for sticking it on, I just used double-sided tape. I don't want anything too permanent because I will pull these down later on. But the reason why I didn't stay with the, I'll call this the rigid side, the side with all the little grooves on it, because this was painted, and as you can see, this paint is completely off. It doesn't even look the same. So going on the back side, which is completely flat, I could use vinyl wrap. Now it's much easier to get multiple colors in vinyl wrap, especially whites. I just buy a heap of whites and then I put them all together and see which one is going to match the case I'm trying to match. And as you can see, the white I used this time matches the LIAN Li white pretty good. So that's why on the white O11 AIR Mini, it's just the flat side covers, and then of course on the black, basically black is black, it's always going to look pretty good. That's why I use the rigid side with all the grooves, and that's how this one looked. And this was the first one I did, and this one really went off. People thought they were cardboard, plastic, aluminum. To be honest, you could use anything you want. If you got like some stiff cardboard, some plastic, you can just experiment and go nuts. This makes it a little bit tricky if you do want to make it flush against the front. As you can see, these ones are right against the front, and you have to do cutouts for like all these rivets in the corners, things like where the side panel drops down here. You got to make sure you have little cutouts. So I did go a little bit extra to get that nice flush look. And the reason why I did this is this was kind of last minute, because as I was building these systems up, I kind of thought, all right, now most of the O11 cases can fit 360 radiators. This is basically the first one to offer only 240 support. It can nearly fit a 360 radiator. It can fit 3 120 mil fans. That's basically 360, but the problem is a radiator has an end chamber and then a chamber at the start, and then you have the port, so that bulks it out to something like 400 or something. I don't know the exact measurements, which means you can't fit the 360 radiator in the bottom or the top. And by doing that, if I remove, I'll see if I can actually remove this cover. I don't know if I actually stuck this one in. But yeah, you can see now that it just looks a little bit off having such a long case and having this small radiator. It does look a bit odd. So that's why I added these covers in, to try and potentially hide it all up, to make it more streamlined and look like one whole unit. So that's what I did there. And that's basically it. Very simple. You can experiment whatever you like. And in regards to locating or sourcing these, I just went down to my general hardware store in Australia, where it's something called Bunnings. They sell a lot of aluminum. This is Metal Mate particularly, and they have a lot of different types. This is really the only one of this thickness. You want something about 60 millimeters in height. You don't want anything too small, because you don't want to just be covering the radiator. I wanted to cover the radiator and fans. So with a PE, which is about 38, we'll say 40, and then you have your fans, which are 25, so that's 65. And having this being 60 was just perfect, because it was basically right in flush with the fans. But yeah, go to your local hardware store, see what type of aluminum materials they have, and then you can go from there and just experiment and play around. And I've been using these on the Silverstone FTO2 build. I use that on the 540 rad or 560 rad along the bottom all the way, and I'm going to use these in the upcoming Evo build. You may have seen I've done the white Evo build, and then I'll be doing a black Evo build. I might even release that before this video, because I'm not sure when I'll finish this video. I'm going to be doing top and bottom radiator covers as well, and I've made those ones out of copper, so that should be pretty interesting. But yeah, that's pretty much on those. Moving on to the bottom rad here. Now, a reason why I don't show connecting a lot of my radiators in my time-lapse builds and in the videos is it can be quite tricky, especially the back ports here. So not this front port, the back port here, and then the back port on this one. So they are connected. I always connect these with soft tubing. I do black soft tubing if it's a black build, and then I do white soft tubing if it's a white build, of course, because it is harder. It makes it harder to see, and you don't really want to see that soft tubing. So this port here has like 290s on the back port, so it goes out and then down, and then some soft tube just runs out the bottom under the motherboard, because there are little holes. It runs out the back up into that reservoir, which is mounted on the side, and that's the same as this top port out here. It just goes straight across and then into that back port. So I do that just so you don't really need hard tube, because it'd be a nightmare trying to hard tube anything into that back port, and you just don't need it. And the reason why I don't show it in time-lapse builds, it would just be too complex. It would take too long. It would bulk it out the video, because most of the time in the time-lapse I would install the radiator. I know it is kind of cheating. I would install the radiator, kind of make it look nice, then off film I'll pull that radiator back out, get like 2 meters of soft tube, connect it all up, feed the soft tube in, and then slowly, as I pull the back out, feed the radiator back into place, tie it down, and then I would measure that tube off and connect it in the back. And that's something that I don't feel would be very fitting for the time-lapse video, and it just wouldn't go in nicely with the flow. So that's pretty much how I do those radiator ports at the back. I do them in nearly every build where you see only one tube going to a radiator. The back port towards the motherboard is always going via soft tube to the back of the motherboard tray out the back and then connecting. Now another thing I want to cover is active backplates. Now this is the first time I've really used them, and in this build I did have quite a few dramas, and I do believe other people are having some dramas as well. That is when they in the first slot. Now I don't think this is really anyone's issue, definitely not EK's issue, definitely not motherboard manufacturers, because they're not going to design their motherboards in case someone wants to put an active backplate on their video card. And it's just because they're so much higher than a standard backplate, because you do have to get that cold plate on the block, and then the O-ring, and then the acrylic top as well. So the issue I had being in the very first slot, I'll get some close-up ones of these. You probably didn't even know in the video that I had to cut quite a bit out, and I was actually surprised how well I did cut it out. So the top of the IO cover, sorry, the bottom of the IO cover, which is on the top corner of the active backplate, I actually had to cut a little slit. So this backplate actually slides right in along the IO cover, and that worked out pretty good. So I did have to dismantle the whole motherboard, grab a Dremel, and carefully cut that out. Now the other issue was the other end of it. Now this was a bigger issue, was the actual acrylic top of the block was hitting the memory. Now there wasn't really much I could do. I could maybe swap the memory, but if I have a look, the T-Force memory basically stops where the PCB stops on the memory. So I couldn't really do much there. Shorter memory wouldn't have helped. So I actually had to go to town and start cutting inside the acrylic top of the block. Now I couldn't just cut it like a notch out, because it was actually far enough in that if I just did that, the block would have leaked. So I had to be very careful. So I had to like basically cut a little divot out, which was probably the first time I've done something like that, and it was quite tricky because you can't just go with a Dremel and cut down across. I had to use a mixture of tools. I've got a really small Dremel blade, so you couldn't use a real big one because the diameter was just too big. It would have made it too messy. And then I used sort of engraving bits that were quite sharp, and then I had to continuously just going across and across and down until I got a nice little square wedge out, and then I sanded it, cleaned it all up, and that's pretty much it. And I think it turned out pretty good. Then I just sort of filed the corners off so it wasn't sharp, and it kind of resembled the same pattern as the rest of the block did, because the EK blocks have like a bit of a bevel on all of it to help with the RGB lighting. And that's basically it. But yeah, definitely if this board was an ATX board and it was the second slot down of the case, it would have been fine, no issues at all. But people running something like say Threadripper, X299, and I think ITX and MATX, which this one is, if you are in your very first slot in the case, you will probably encounter issues unless you don't have an IO cover. Like yeah, I probably could have taken the IO cover off, but I don't know, I really went with this board because I liked the IO cover and how it matched with the rest of this theme. So just something to keep in note there. And something else I want to cover on both of these builds I didn't have written down are the little covers I use on the PCI Express power cables. Now I'll put some links up for these. I just get these off eBay. I think they're about $5–10 bucks each. I would recommend ordering a bunch of them because there are two types. There's an A and a B, depending on whether your latch on your 8-pin is either up or down, because there are two types. Obviously, if you want it like this one where it runs under, you need to get the type where the latch is on top and it runs under. But if you have a different card where the latch is underneath, obviously if I went to use this same connector, it means your cables would be running over the top. Now, that's not a big issue. Sometimes I've had to run it over the top if I've got no rad space underneath. Then you need the other connector that runs the cable over the top. So I recommend getting 2 of the A type, 2 of the B type, and then you've got enough sets if you do build 2 PCs and you find out one GPU has the notches up and one GPU has the notches down. And then all I do to finish it off is I just get a little bit of aluminum. You could use cardboard, anything. I just vinyl it or paint it, and then I just make a nice little square and just stick that on. This one's black, it looks really neat. And then this one is the titanium silver. That looks really neat, and that just finishes it off really nicely. You can't see the cables at all, and it just looks really clean. Because running cables out of here, you'd have to come right out, do a really sharp bend, and there's nothing worse than something like your 24-pin or a dual 8-pin PCIe power connector when it's not a nice curve. If it's pushed down, scrunched down, where it sort of curves up and then has a bend and goes straight again. Just doesn't look nice, and some of these real compact builds, that would probably happen. You don't get that nice curve. So definitely look at these 180-degree adapters. They do finish off your GPUs really nicely. But yeah, that's pretty much it on this video. Just something quick to show you guys these covers. I'll put some links up to where I get these in Australia. That'll give you a bit of a reference on what to look for if you're overseas in America. Pretty sure America will definitely have something like this, but it'll just be a different brand and so on. But yeah, I want to thank LIAN LI for sending these two cases out to build in. I didn't do a review on this case. I didn't really think there was that much difference between the original O11 and then the O11 Mini and then the Air Mini to sort of warrant a review. Really, the only difference was the PCIe can now support ATX. The case is a little bit wider to support that. And then you've also got now the downgrade from 360 rad support to the 240. And that's basically the two main changes. But I have done the Evo review. Make sure you check out that because that case is completely different on a whole new level. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video and I'll see you in the next one.